It's another Friday, so let's answer some questions from the listeners in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, where new customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, we have about 15 or so questions to get to in today's episode. I understand that once we get into the beginning part of the offseason, there's not as many questions as we get as opposed to the end of the year or in the heat of the regular season. But still, we still got a lot of questions to get to pertaining to some trades, pertaining to some free agency. So we're not going to waste any time in doing so. First question comes from Nick. Could Freddie Fermin be a trade candidate? He could be a solid starting catcher for many teams, and with so much catcher depth in the minors, it seems like we could afford to trade Fermin and maybe plug someone into his role. I would say in past Royals teams, Freddie Fermin would be a very easy trade chip because backup catchers under Ned Yost and Mike Matheny, they just didn't play that often. Salvador Perez was doing the majority of the catching, and those guys got in maybe once a week. But also, you talk about those guys not having as much trade value as Freddie Fermin. In Matt Quatrero's lineups, though, Freddie Fermin plays a lot. I mean, he's out there for a lot of platoon lineups. The pitchers really like him. They work well with him. He's great behind the plate defensively. He's got a little pop in that bat. And so it does bring up the question, can you get a lot of value for a guy like Freddie Fermin right now? I would say they could get value. A ton of it, probably not, because I just don't think that catchers get a ton in return unless they're the top catcher in the game. I do feel like he could start for a lot of teams that aren't playoff teams. But again, I think it would more so have to be about a team calling about Freddie Fermin than the Royals shopping him around. Because right now, I get the sense they really like him. They probably view Carter Jensen as a guy who's another year away. And so next offseason, you could look into unloading Freddie Fermin because a guy like Carter Jensen could be ready to go and taking on that role that Freddie Fermin currently possesses. So to me, I don't think that he'll be a trade candidate right now unless we hear some smoke around other teams really wanting to go after him, because in AAA, they could go with a backup catcher, but I'm not sure they're giving as much team value to the Royals that Freddie Fermin gives at this point in time. Dave's question is, what minor league pitchers in the Royals farm system do you think might be legitimate big league starters? I have some guesses, but I really don't know. It's tough to tell right now because some of the guys that I'm really high on are a ways away. I feel like Blake Walters is the best pitching prospect, like big time potential prospect in this farm system. I'm just not as high on Frank Mozzicato. Ben Kudrna could absolutely be a big league starter, but from what we heard at spring training last year, Blake Walters has the pure stuff. He's got a triple-digit fastball, could have some really good wipeout pitches once he matures a little bit. So I think he could absolutely be a big league starter. I think Noah Cameron can be a big league starter this year for Kansas City. I think he's pretty much ready at this point. So if we're talking about just a big league starter, there's a handful of guys I think that could make some starts. Ben Kudrna being one, Noah Cameron being another. I don't know if they're going to be frontline guys. I think Blake Walters could be a frontline guy if he develops properly. But still, it's been a while since the Royals have drafted a guy, developed a guy, and turned him into a frontline pitcher. Cole Reagans, acquired from Texas. Brady Singer, he's a number 4 in the rotation, though at one point in time, I'll give credit, was a number 1 or number 2 for a bad Royals team. I think on a good Royals team, Blake Walters would be my pick to be a legitimate big league starter, but he's still years away, and I'm mainly just going off of what some of the people in the organization have said about Blake Walters. Next question we got here comes from Aiden. Hot take: the Royals signed Alex Bregman to a 5-year, $125 million contract, signed Tyler O'Neill to a 3-year, $36 million deal, and trade for Taylor Ward. Thoughts? If the Royals go after Alex Bregman, I don't think they're going to be able to go after somebody else. I think it would have to be Bregman, and then you're trying to trade for Taylor Ward. I don't think they would have the funds to go out there and get Bregman and also get Tyler O'Neill and then get Taylor Ward. To me, I think they're going to add 2 guys to this lineup. I would be pretty surprised if they added 3 starters to this lineup, as good as that would sound. I don't hate the idea. I just don't see the Royals being that aggressive in terms of free agency and trading. I feel like the front runner of those guys would be Taylor Ward. You guys have heard me talk about him multiple times throughout this week. Tyler O'Neill certainly could be a piece. I do worry a little bit about the platoon splits, same way I worry about the platoon splits with Jock Peterson. You just face more righties out there than you do lefties. So Jock Peterson's been a better hitter over the last 3 years, where Tyler O'Neill had his one breakout year this past season, and that had been his first great year in a couple of years since going back to his days with St. Louis. So with Bregman, I'm just getting this feeling he's going to go back to Houston, or he's going to go to Detroit. He's got that connection with A.J. Hinch. Tyler O'Neill, I think Boston's going to make a strong play for him, but I'm still pretty high on Taylor Ward getting to Kansas City with some form of a trade. Jonathan asked, do we have the ammo and willingness to get Alec Boehm and Taylor Ward? Well, as for Taylor Ward, I think they do have the resources to go out there and get him, if I'm being honest with you. They had interest going back to the trade deadline this past season. I think they're going to revisit come the winter meetings. That's just my gut feeling right now. Whereas Alec Boehm, I don't think it'd be a blockbuster trade, but it's different for Philadelphia because I think they would either be unloading Alec Boehm to go big for somebody like Alex Bregman to play third base, or they would be looking to get legitimate big league players in return for Alec Boehm. I think Boehm would fit nicely in Kansas City. I think he would be a huge upgrade over at the hot corner, but I think Philly's going to have a pretty high asking price for him, one that I don't think the Royals could meet, whether it be trading some starting pitchers or trading somebody in that bullpen. I just think it's going to take a little bit more when it comes to Alec Boehm. So ammo and willingness for both, I'm going to go no on that, but I do think the ammo and willingness to go after Taylor Ward. Sam asks, trading for Trout, thoughts on that? It's not as impossible as you would think. And Mike Trout, I do believe, is still a great baseball player, and he's one of my favorite players I've ever watched in watching the game of baseball. At this point, though, you have to question the health and the longevity that he's got in his big league career. I mean, Mike Trout is certainly still a name. I'm not going to tarnish that or disregard that at all. But I go back over the last 5 years for Mike Trout. He'll be 33 this year. He's still a tremendous baseball player, and if he plays every single game or plays 150 games, he's going to be, I think, a top 5 finisher for the MVP award. But 29 games this past year, 82 in 2023, 119 in 2022, 36 in 2021, did have the 53 in 2020. So it's been 5 years now, coming up on 6 years since the last time he gave a full season. It's not impossible. The money is something you would have to work around there. Again, he turned 33 100 days ago, so it will be his age 33/34 season, and he's not a free agent until 2031. So it's a lot of money on the books there. It's not impossible. Royals Review did a good article on that. It sounds like it'd be a joke in many years of the Royals trading for Mike Trout, but I'd be curious if the Angels are shopping him around, even with that massive contract that he signed going back to, when was that? 2019, I believe it was. He just has never been healthy since signing that long-term deal with the Los Angeles Angels. But don't hate the question. I'm going to say, though, that it's very unlikely that the Royals would be one of those teams to go after somebody like Mike Trout. Last one here before we hit our first break. Prepsley has 2 questions. One, will you ever be active in the Royals subreddit? Number 2, where do you think Daniel Lynch will be since they consider Bubic as a starter? Will he stay in the pen or go back to being a starter? As for the subreddit question, I'm open to changing things up a little bit this next season. I might put out a tweet at the beginning of 2025 asking for some advice, asking for some input from the listeners, what you want to see me do differently for the upcoming 2025 season. So I'm definitely not ruling it out. And if a lot more people want me to appear on subreddit, then sure, we could absolutely be thinking about that for the 2025 season. And as for Daniel Lynch, I think he stays in the bullpen. The way JJ Piccolo talked about Chris Bubic and the rotation, he said, we view him as a starter. And then he said, Daniel Lynch is a guy that could start. That to me screams, we're leaving him in the pen. If he needs to start a game, if he has to make a spot start, he will be available to do so. All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, we still got a handful of questions to get to on Locked On Royals. So that'll be coming up right here for Mailbag Friday. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today in SelectQuote. The World Series, Super Bowl, the Olympics, the world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. In sports, winning is everything. That's why you always need a good strategy to keep you moving toward the goalpost. Winning strategies for life are just as important. That's why on my team, I have life insurance through SelectQuote to protect my legacy and my family's financial future. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/lockedon. Go to SelectQuote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/lockedon. We are going to jump back into our questions over at X. This one comes from Eli. Which under-the-radar minor leaguer could you see taking a surprise jump in 2025? Also, could the Royals take a flyer on a blocked outfielder or pitcher in another organization and swap Prado or Waters since it would seem they're blocked in KC? Like these two questions. As for the surprise minor leaguer, I will go with, does Gavin Cross count? Gavin Cross was having a great first half in 2024. I think he's ready to start the year in Omaha. And if I'm talking about making an impact in Kansas City, he's somebody that I will give a chance. I absolutely think that he could give this team some value. He's a first-round pick, first-round talent right there. He just needs to stay healthy. Another guy that I'll say could make that jump is Javier Vaz, a guy that can play the outfield and the infield, an on-base guy, doesn't strike out at all. He's got no pop whatsoever. But I'd be curious to see him in a role like Adam Frazier's, where he's young, he's quick, he's got the versatility defensively, and I think his bat could be better than what Adam Frazier gave you. So I'll say Javi Vaz for one of my surprise minor leaguers to make that jump in 2025. As for guys that are blocked, it's always easy to go out there and acquire relievers and starters that are blocked. I mean, look at James MacArthur. I know not a lot of people are super high on him, but look for a struggling guy in AAA and try to make a move where you're giving up barely anything in your minor league system. I don't know if the Royals will move on from Drew Waters just on the off chance somebody gets banged up in the outfield and you could bring up a guy who's got big league experience. He's good defensively. So I don't know if the Royals would want to trade away Drew Waters. Nick Prado's a different story. He's a first baseman. They tried him in the outfield. I don't think it worked at all. The bat to me is just not really going to come around. I think he strikes out way too much, too passive of an approach. So I could see some other team, because of the first round title to his name, making a trade with the Royals. And the Royals also have a handful of first basemen I think could jump Nick Prado here in the next year or so. So I would be more open to the idea of trading Nick Prado. I would like to keep Drew Waters as defensive insurance down in the minor league level. But for getting a guy that's blocked, a starter or reliever in any organization, you might not even need to give up somebody like a Drew Waters or Nick Prado. You could give up somebody who's struggling down in high A or a lottery ticket kid to get you somebody that could maybe take a roster spot at some point in Kansas City. But do like those two questions from Eli. No Name's question is, do you think the Royals give an offer to Sasaki? Also, do you think the Royals should consider signing Austin Slater? He has a good OBP and can play all three outfield spots. As for Sasaki, it was kind of weird that some reports came out there that the Dodgers now are not likely to sign Roki Sasaki. I don't know if I'm buying it just yet. I think the Dodgers should be the favorite. Could always be proven wrong. I just don't know if the Royals will be one of those teams in the hunt for him. It's not going to be a type of contract that Yamamoto got, of course, but still, I don't see the Royals being in play for him, mainly because they haven't been linked to Roki Sasaki at any point since he's been posted. And as for Austin Slater, I'm not opposed to it whatsoever. The goal of this offseason is going after guys that are high OBP guys. And Austin Slater, they got a little bit of a taste of when they played Baltimore in the 2024 Wild Card Series. But also, I look at what Slater was able to do in Baltimore after spending, time with two other teams that year, with the Giants and Cincinnati. He only really caught on in Baltimore, and still that was only for 33 games. He'd be absolutely affordable. If you look at him to maybe replace the Garrett Hampson role, I wouldn't necessarily hate it. But overall, for 2024, he just wasn't very good. I think he'd be a very cheap option. Maybe you throw him a bone and have a spring training invite coming up in 2025. But to me, I think the Royals will be looking for even better on-base guys than Austin Slater. But decent poll there, right? I think he'll be available. The Royals could certainly entertain it because of that defensive flexibility. And we all know how much they do love that defensive flexibility. Next one comes from the Mizzler. Thoughts on trading for Brendan Donovan to lead off next year? Cardinals are going to have a fire sale, and he's 27 with 3 years of control and a lot of positional flexibility. Not sure what their asking price is, but he seems like a guy that fills every hole for us. Brendan Donovan is an excellent player, and I think that he could absolutely be the solution for the Royals at the top of the order. My concern is it's the Cardinals. And as much as we like to say it's not a rivalry and you don't just hang up the phone because it's somewhat of a rivalry, you don't want to benefit the other team in your state. The Cardinals, I feel like, would be asking a lot for Brendan Donovan. I think the Phillies, or maybe it was the Tigers, were linked to being interested in Brendan Donovan, or maybe that was just rumors. I would love the Royals going after somebody like him, not just because of the on base, but because that defensive flexibility. I just think the Cardinals are going to be asking for more than what the Royals have to offer. And since it'd be the Royals, to me, I feel like they would be asking for even more than what other teams would be giving the Cardinals for Brendan Donovan. I love the idea. Absolutely love it. Only 27 years old, 3 years of control. But that means the price is going to be a little bit higher when you're talking about the years of control and the young age and the offensive numbers that he had in 2024. Charles asked, how satisfied are you with Frank Mozzicato's development since being drafted? I'll be honest with you. I already kind of teased it a little bit. I'm not super high on the development of Frank Mozzicato. I think there is a chance that he can take a big step forward this year. Why I'm struggling to get behind the overall development is because the velocity is still not there. He's still sitting, 89 to 91 with the fastball. That's not good enough. That's just not good enough to be a starter at the big league level in this day and age. You mean 93, 94 seems slow for a lot of starters out there. If you're in the high 80s with a fastball, it just doesn't fly anymore unless you have multiple other pitches that are plus. He's got to make a big step forward this year, in my opinion, for me to start considering him a future piece of this rotation. Look, the overall numbers aren't terrible. It's not like he's a bust, but for a first-round pick, I was expecting a lot more at this point in his career than where he currently is at. Bryce's question is a trade for a pitcher and a hitter. Who would you choose for each? For a hitter, I'm sticking with Taylor Ward. He seems to be the guy that I've circled time and time and again. I love the Brendan Donovan idea. I just think that he's going to be more costly than what Taylor Ward would be for a team that we all know is just not going to be competitive in 2025. As much as the Angels are making moves that I just really can't wrap my mind around, I don't think they're a team that's going to win more than 75 games in 2025. So I think Taylor Ward would be the hitter. As for the pitcher, another great question there. I would maybe look to, oh man, maybe you could look add a team, maybe on the National League side. I'm trying to do this on the fly for trade candidates because of the main guys that I think are going to be traded, like a Garrett Crochet. The Royals won't be in the hunt for that. I feel like the Giants, again, we've brought the Giants a handful of times as somebody that could be traded. Oakland, I just don't know, is going to have a starter that would be interesting, although this could also be a bullpen arm that makes a lot of sense there. I know we just talked about a bullpen arm being traded for in one of our episodes this week. Kind of looking it up right now, somebody that could make sense. Also, for a hitter, I love the idea of Brandon Lau. I just don't know if the Rays would be somebody to move on from him. Yandy Diaz, another guy that would make sense there. Yeah, I mean, Devin Williams is a big name. I just don't think the Royals would have what the Brewers would be looking for in unloading somebody like a Devin Williams. I know I'm kind of rambling and stalling as much as I can here for trade candidates. If you're going back to the Angels, Tyler Anderson makes a little bit of sense. Peter Fairbanks for the Rays would be a good bullpen option. He's got local ties as well. I believe he was a Missouri Tiger, if I'm not mistaken there. Kyle Finnegan, you could go back to the Nationals after you already acquired Hunter Harvey. He's another name that could make sense there. I apologize for not having somebody loaded up and ready to go. Jesus Luzardo, hey, the Royals, I think, were interested this past offseason, though they're not going for a starting pitcher. That'd be another name there to watch if the Royals were willing to unload a couple of pieces to go get another frontline starter. Again, just feels unlikely to me. So if they were to go get an arm, you're likely looking at a bullpen option here. Ryan Helsley of the Cardinals will be a big, big name to go out there and get. I'm just not too high on the idea of them trading the best closer in the National League, in my opinion, at least the most reliable guy this past season. So unfortunately, I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody that sticks out pitching wise for the Royals as things stand, because what JJ Picollo told us, or at least told Andy Rogers in that article, was that they're pretty good on the rotation, and if they're going to add anybody to the bullpen, it would be a depth piece. So those are some of the names that I think are being floated out there. Just no smoke to the Royals right now and going after any of those guys. But as for the bat, I'm locking in right now that I think you got to zero in on Taylor Ward. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll get to our last set of questions on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Our last sponsor I want to give a shout out to is also our title sponsor in FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. For my pick this week, I'll go college football, a fun one. I'll take Tennessee to cover against Georgia. That will be College game day tomorrow. Hoping for a tight game and one that absolutely will decide some spots in the college football playoffs. So I'll take the Vols to cover against Georgia. Only a few more questions to get to with about 5 minutes to go. This one comes from Jeff. You may have already covered this, but when the Royals get a new deal done with FanDuel or Amazon, will any of those games be available on local channels, just in case one doesn't have internet? Good question. If you did watch our episode yesterday, we gave as much as we could about Diamond Sports and FanDuel Sports, whatever it's called, and the Royals not being a team that have a deal in place right now. If Bally was able to have the app and then also through cable, I would feel pretty confident that they would be able to broadcast the games on cable as well, because you're not going to take away a large portion of your audience who will only watch through cable. So I do think there would be another way. Maybe that's what the Royals are figuring out right now. But to my knowledge, I think the other teams that have an agreement will also have it available on cable, because it'll be another service just like Bally. With them buying out Bally, I think they just take the place of what Bally was. Maybe it'd even be the same channel of what you had on cable. So, Jeff, I think my best guess right now is that it will be available on cable, not just through Amazon Prime or whatever it would be. RB Carr's question is, if you were JJ, would you consider taking on the contract for Jordan Montgomery if they would give up Jake McCarthy as a part of the deal? What if you could use them for your pitching depth to flip someone for another bat, such as Alec Boehm or Jonathan India? So a lot of pieces here. I love Jake McCarthy's ability. I think he screams being a Royal. Jordan Montgomery was just awful this past year. He's worth a lot of money. And even Arizona's GM was saying, it's just a guy that they screwed up in signing. It was a bad deal. But I don't know if the Diamondbacks would unload Jake McCarthy, even if it meant some team taking on Jordan Montgomery. And I think Jordan Montgomery bounces back a little bit. He didn't have a spring training at all this past year. He was holding out for a good contract because of Scott Boras. Made the mistake, never really got right. But I still think he's a good starter, so it'd be good value, in my opinion. You get a great outfielder, a good leadoff bat, and a starter for maybe your number 4, number 5 spot in the rotation. And then when you look at somebody like Alec Boehm or Jonathan India, flipping them or flipping one of your guys like an Alec Marsh or Chris Bubich, I'd be curious what the price would be for Jonathan India. I think Alec Boehm would cost a little bit more than Alec Marsh and Chris Bubich, but I'd be very curious if Jonathan India, that would be the right amount, if you will, and Chris Bubich and Alec Marsh for Jonathan India, because that'd be another good bat for your lineup. But certainly J.J. Picoula's got his eyes on a handful of guys. Not sure Jake McCarthy would be one of them in Arizona, and if Arizona would be willing to trade him, even if you had Jordan Montgomery and that contract thrown in as a part of the deal. And lastly, good buddy Josh Kaiser. They do great work over at One Royal Way. Jordan Foote, and Joel Penfield, love watching their stuff. So absolutely go check them out on wherever you get your podcast and such. But Josh's question is not to get greedy, Jack, but after the Royals extended Waka, in my opinion, they need to do at least one more big, relative to the Royals, move, one that hurts this offseason. Let's say it can be only one. What is that move, and the one you'd stake your reputation on? Well, I've been talking over and over again with Taylor Ward. I think that he is the bat that makes the most sense to trade for, mainly because J.J. Picoula said he's looking for a better version of Garrett Hampson, or at least from what that article from The Athletic said a couple of weeks ago. That just feels like what Taylor Ward is, and the Royals had previous interest at the trade deadline. It comes down to, are the Angels willing to sell off their leadoff hitter and their starting left fielder, and a guy who has a lot of defensive flexibility? If I'm going with a move that I think would shock a lot of fans, man, I'm throwing money at either Jurickson Profar or Anthony Santander. Like, really shock the core of Major League Baseball in a 4 or 5 year deal. For Santander, maybe it's a 5-year, $100 million contract. Like, that to me would be a big time move. And I still think reasonable for the Royals. But if I was going to say the one move that is a big Royals move, I'm going to say Jurickson Profar. I'm going to say a 4-year deal for Jurickson Profar. As Josh said, I'll stake my reputation on it. I think a likelier deal is the Taylor Ward one. But if I'm saying they're going after a big-time player that's coming off a great season that could be your solution to the middle of the order bat or a leadoff bat, right, Jurickson Profar makes a lot of sense. I mean, you'd have two guys right there that can play multiple positions. Jurickson Profar is a switch hitter. I still think he can get better the later stages into his career. I think he'd fit perfectly in Kansas City. And you'd have two guys there that could handle their own positions. And Taylor Ward could play right field. Jurickson Profar could play left. You feel good now about upgrading at 2 spots in the outfield. And I don't think you'd have to, as I always say, break your back financially to make that deal happen. So I would say Jurickson Profar would be that guy that really, from all the listeners, that seems like the least complained about idea. I've gotten complaints about Jock Peterson, complaints about Anthony Santander, complaints about Tyler O'Neill, complaints about Taylor Ward. Jurickson Profar is like the one guy a lot of people have said, no, I'd be totally fine with a deal involving Jurickson Profar. So I can't wait till the winter meetings rolls around and we can start seeing some of these deals happen. And hopefully the Royals are one of those teams, like they were last year, to be very aggressive and getting their guys. Let's get into it for another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'll be off this weekend, but back at it talking more free agency and more trades on Monday. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.